Ben Nichols had never been fond of snowstorms. Sure, they were pretty when they dusted the pine trees in white and turned the world outside into a surreal, silent landscape. But when you were stuck in a cabin with no electricity and a nearly empty fridge, snowstorms quickly lost their charm. That night, Mount Cirrus had decided to remind him why. The wind screamed through the trees like a pack of angry wolves. The cabin groaned, its old wooden beams creaking as the storm pounded against the walls. Ben sat by the fireplace, nursing a mug of hot coffee that had long since stopped being hot, staring out the window at the swirling chaos. He wasn't expecting any visitors, and frankly, he wasn't thrilled by the idea of any. Being alone in the woods had its perks: peace, quiet, the occasional bear encounter. But mostly, it was just him, his computer, and the comforting hum of solitude. He was halfway through editing a new story when a sudden thud from the porch snapped him out of his concentration. Ben glanced at the window, but saw nothing but a blur of snow. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, slamming the laptop shut. The wind could make some strange noises out here, but this one sounded wrong, like someone had knocked. Ben's first instinct was to ignore it. The logical part of his brain whispered that it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a wayward raccoon, looking for shelter from the storm. But then he heard it again, this time louder. A distinct, metallic clang, followed by another sharp thud, as if something had been thrown against the door. "Well, that's unusual," he said to no one in particular. He set the mug down on the counter, grabbed his coat, and shuffled to the door. When you lived in a cabin isolated from civilization, anything out of the ordinary could mean trouble, or a good story, if you were lucky. He swung the door open, squinting into the thick snowstorm that swallowed everything in its path. The wind lashed against his face like icy needles, and he pulled his collar up, wishing for just a few more layers of warmth. At first, he saw nothing but swirling white. Then, just as he was about to step back inside, something caught his eye. A figure standing at the foot of the porch. It was a woman. Ben's brain processed this information slowly. She was tall, impossibly so, and her figure was illuminated in the faint light from inside the cabin. She was dressed in what could only be described as a spacesuit, a shiny, reflective outfit that shimmered under the snowflakes, the material seemingly impervious to the storm. Her face was partially covered by a hood, but her eyes, glowing faintly like two orbs of soft starlight, shone through the darkness. She stood stock still, her hands held out in front of her like she was ready to defend herself, though from what Ben couldn't immediately tell. Can I help you?" Ben called out, suddenly feeling self-conscious in his flannel shirt and mismatched socks. The woman flinched at the sound of his voice, her eyes widening in fear. She took a step back, as if expecting him to lunge at her. "Whoa! Hey!" Ben raised his hands in mock surrender, taking a few cautious steps toward her. "I'm not going to bite or anything, promise, just it's really cold out here and you're, well, a little unusual." The woman blinked, her expression a mixture of confusion and terror. She spoke in a language that sounded like a mix of clicking and humming, almost musical, but sharp like a melody on the edge of breaking. I do not understand," she said, her words stilted, as though she had rehearsed them 1,000 times. "You are not what I thought you would be." Ben stared at her for a moment, more confused than anything. "You thought I'd be what exactly? A tall, grumpy guy who spends his days yelling at the snow?" The woman's gaze shifted between him and the door, her body tensing. You are not dangerous?" Ben couldn't help it. He chuckled. "Not unless you count a really bad cup of coffee as dangerous, but I think you're safe from that." He gave her a wink, though it wasn't exactly reassuring. His humor had a habit of landing somewhere between awkward and, "What the hell was that?" The woman didn't move, her eyes still wide with what could only be described as fear. It was almost comical. Here she was standing in front of a guy who couldn't even figure out how to make spaghetti without burning it, and she was terrified of him. Ben shifted his weight, rubbing the back of his neck. Listen, I'm not exactly normal either, but if you're cold, I've got a fire going. You're welcome to come inside. She took another hesitant step back, then glanced at the door, as if trying to decide if it was safe to cross the threshold. Ben, for his part, wasn't sure what he had expected. A stranded traveler? A lost hiker? A bear wearing a parka? Anything seemed possible, given the state of his luck. Okay, Ben said, more to himself than to her. Let's try this again. I'm Ben, by the way, and you are... The woman hesitated for a moment. Varia. Ben nodded, taking the word in with an air of practiced indifference. It was only after she spoke it a second time that he realized it was a name from space. He'd read enough science fiction to know that much, but he didn't let that bother him. Instead, he simply stepped back into the cabin and motioned for her to follow. All right, Varia, welcome to my humble abode. It's small, it's freezing, and it probably smells like I haven't cleaned in months, but it's got a great view of the snowstorm, and I've got a chair that, while not exactly comfortable, won't try to eat you either. Varia remained at the threshold, her glowing eyes searching his face for any sign of trickery. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the warmth of the cabin. As soon as the door closed behind her, the storm outside seemed to grow even louder, the wind howling like a beast beyond the walls. Ben watched her closely as she stood in the middle of the small living room, looking at everything with a combination of awe and dread. She still looked like she was about to bolt at any moment. Ben, unsure how to proceed, took a step toward the fireplace. So, Varia, is it? Can I get you something to drink? Coffee, tea, or I don't know, alien juice? She stared at him for a moment before shaking her head. I do not understand. Why? Do you offer kindness? Her voice trembled, barely above a whisper. Ben set the kettle down on the stove, trying to think of something non-threatening to say. Well, I don't think the snowstorm is going to stop anytime soon, and it's either sit in silence or try to make conversation with a stranger who looks like they're about to either vaporize me or shrink me down into a science experiment. He gave her a crooked grin. But I'll take my chances. She didn't laugh. Instead, she eyed him cautiously. I trust you, she said quietly, but only for now. Ben snorted. Fair enough. Let's just get through the night, and we'll figure the rest out later. And as the fire crackled and the storm continued its assault on the cabin, the tension in the air seemed to thaw, just a little. Ben had never been good at handling awkward situations. He could talk to his neighbor about how the weather was either too cold or too hot, or make small talk about which brand of jam was best for toast. But a giant, glowing-eyed alien in his cabin, that was a whole different ballgame. He might as well have been trying to explain the concept of humor to a brick wall. The storm outside continued to rage, but the atmosphere in the cabin was oddly still. Varia sat across from Ben on the couch, her posture stiff as she clutched her arms to her chest, as if bracing for the worst. Her eyes flicked around the room, scanning everything with what Ben could only describe as cautious curiosity. The flickering firelight illuminated the strange metallic sheen of her suit, which seemed to shimmer like liquid silver under the dim glow. Ben, for his part, tried to act normal, or at least as normal as one could with a being from another world sitting in their living room. He was no expert in alien etiquette, but he had seen enough sci-fi movies to know that you didn't just sit there in awkward silence. No, you had to ask questions. It was what they did in these situations. So, Ben said, breaking the silence with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. You're from another planet, huh? Like outer space and all that? Varia looked at him, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. Outer space? She asked, her voice still thick with the accent that made her words sound more musical than they probably were meant to. I do not understand the term, but yes, I am from the stars. Ben stared at her. From the stars? Seriously? He chuckled nervously. You're really from another planet? Like actual alien from space kind of deal? She nodded slowly, but there was a hesitation in her gaze, as if she wasn't sure how to explain it. "Yes, my home is distant," she said. "We live on a planet far from here. It is cold, not like your world, but still cold." Ben raised an eyebrow, already imagining how bad the weather on her planet must be. "So your planet's like really cold, huh? Snowstorms all the time?" Varia seemed to think this over for a moment. "We have other kinds of storms. Not snow. We have storms of energy, storms that tear through the land and burn it. We hide beneath the surface until they pass. But your snow, it is gentle." She tilted her head. "And strange." Ben blinked at her, trying to wrap his mind around what she was saying. "Energy storms? You mean like lightning storms? Or something worse?" Varia shifted slightly, glancing down at the floor before meeting his gaze again. "Much worse. They are not like your thunderstorms. They come in pulses, ripping the ground apart, and if you are caught in one, there is no escape." She hesitated. "I fled from such a storm. My ship was damaged." Ben nodded, though he had no idea what to say to that. "Well, that sounds extremely terrifying. But hey, at least there's no energy storm around here. Just a whole lot of snow and wind. Real exciting stuff." Varia didn't seem comforted by this, but her shoulders relaxed a little. "I do not understand. On my planet, when we meet someone, like you, they usually try to capture us, or study us." Ben snorted, his mind racing as he tried to piece together how this situation was supposed to work. "Capture? Study? Listen, lady, you've got the wrong guy here. I'm not exactly a scientist. I'm a writer, okay? I don't even know how to cook proper spaghetti without setting off the smoke alarm, so capturing and studying aliens is way out of my league." Varia's head tilted to one side as she considered this. "A writer?" She repeated the word slowly, as though testing its sound. "You write things?" "Yeah, like books," Ben replied with a shrug, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "Mostly science fiction stuff. You know, spaceships, aliens, people making bad decisions on distant planets." Varia blinked, her expression unreadable. "But that is fiction?" she asked carefully. "Not real?" Ben blinked, a little thrown off by the question. Yeah. I mean, I hope it's not real. The last thing I need is a real alien invasion while I'm just trying to get through my next deadline." He shook his head with a half-smile. "But no, not real. Just imaginary stories." Varia stared at him for a long moment. "Your stories, are they not dangerous?" she asked. "Do they not teach your kind to fear those from other worlds?" Her eyes glowed faintly, and her voice grew quieter. "When I first saw you, I feared you, because of what I have been taught." Ben scratched his head, unsure of what to say. "Yeah, well, I get it. I get it, for sure. I'm kind of scary, right?" He grinned, though the attempted humor felt flat. "But seriously, you don't have to be afraid of me. I'm more afraid of my coffee machine, which, by the way, is an absolute nightmare. I've tried to fix it, but I just can't." He pointed to the corner of the room where the infernal machine sat, ominously unplugged. Varia's gaze flicked over to the coffee machine, her expression unreadable. Then, to Ben's surprise, she smiled, though it was faint and hesitant. "It does not work?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Ben let out a dramatic sigh. "Oh, it works all right. It works in the sense that it exists to torment me daily. Every time I think I've figured it out, it decides to betray me. So, yeah, I guess it's my greatest nemesis." To his surprise, Varia laughed, softly, almost shyly, but it was real. She looked at him with something like wonder in her eyes. You are not what I expected," she said quietly, as if talking more to herself than to him. Ben, encouraged by the small shift in her demeanor, decided to push the conversation forward. "Well, don't worry about what you expected. I've never lived up to anyone's expectations in my life, especially not when it comes to being a normal human. I've got this whole weird guy who lives alone in a cabin thing down to an art. Varia tilted her head, her curiosity growing. Why do you live alone? Ben shrugged, leaning back into his chair as he tried to come up with an answer that wouldn't make him sound like a total loner. I just like it. It's quiet, peaceful. I don't have to deal with people asking me weird questions about, I don't know, my plans for the future or whether I've ever tried a new yogurt flavor. Plus, I get to write without distractions. I mean, look at this place. Pure inspiration, right? Varia seemed to consider this for a moment. You do not fear being alone? Ben couldn't help but laugh at the simplicity of the question. Oh, I fear being alone all the time. It's just that I'm also terrified of people. So it kind of balances out, you know? He paused, letting the joke hang in the air before adding, I mean, don't get me wrong. Sometimes the solitude gets a little too quiet. But then, I get a knock at the door from someone who looks like they walked out of a sci-fi novel, and it all feels worth it. Varia's eyes widened slightly. You think I look like something from one of your stories? Ben realized his slip-up. Well, when you're literally glowing and dressed like a character straight out of a space opera, it's hard not to think sci-fi. Varia didn't seem offended. In fact, she seemed more intrigued than anything. A space opera? She asked, repeating the unfamiliar term as though tasting it on her tongue. I do not understand. Ben leaned forward, trying to explain. A space opera? It's like it's a genre of stories. You know, like Star Wars or Star Trek. Big adventures in space. Aliens, spaceships, blasters, maybe some romance. Real flashy stuff. Varia seemed to process the words carefully. Romance? She asked, her voice quizzical. Ben laughed. Yeah, like, never mind. Forget I mentioned the romance part. The point is, space stories are fictional. You're the first alien I've ever met that wasn't a character in a book. And, I've got to say, you're doing a great job of breaking the whole alien invasion stereotype. Mostly. Varia gave him a small, genuine smile. I will try to be good. The wind continued to howl outside, a symphony of chaos that pressed against the cabin walls like an insistent, invisible force. But inside, the fire crackled merrily, a bright contrast to the storm's fury. Varia had relaxed slightly, though the stiff formality that clung to her every movement still hung in the air. She hadn't yet taken off her suit, and Ben noticed that she kept her distance from the walls and corners of the room, as if the space itself were too alien for her to feel completely at ease. Ben, for his part, was feeling the weight of a conversation that had to happen. As much as he liked the comfort of being alone, having a bona fide alien in his living room raised questions. He wasn't sure whether he wanted answers, but something told him the situation wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. So, Varia, he began, carefully choosing his words. You said you were fleeing a storm, back on your planet. What exactly happened? I mean, did something else force you to crash here? She hesitated for a moment, her glowing eyes lowering to the floor. The storm, she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the crackling of the fire, is alive. Ben blinked. Alive? He repeated, leaning forward in his seat. How can a storm be alive? Varia met his gaze, her eyes flickering with an odd mix of fear and sorrow. Our storms are not like your Earth storms. They are born from the planet's core. They grow, move, and shift like living creatures. Sometimes they are born of the planet's pain, when the crust shifts, when the internal heat causes ruptures in the land. Ben ran a hand through his hair, processing the information. So you're telling me that the storms on your planet are like giant living beings? Do they, eat things or something? His tone was half joking, but the seriousness in Varia's eyes silenced any attempt at levity. Number they do not eat, she said, shaking her head. But they can destroy. They can burn everything, everything. My people. We live underground to avoid their wrath. But it is not a perfect solution. Not anymore. Her eyes darkened as she spoke, and the shimmer in her suit seemed to dim with her mood. Ben took a moment to process the gravity of what she was saying. His natural instinct was to offer some light-hearted comment, something to break the tension, but the words died in his throat, the atmosphere too heavy for jokes. Why flee the storm then? If it's always like that, shouldn't you just stay underground? Ben asked, genuinely curious now. Varia looked at him with a strange, knowing expression. We did not expect it. We were on our way to a safe zone, a place we believed to be protected from the storms. But the ship malfunctioned. The storm, it reached us before we could find shelter, and so... She trailed off, her voice quiet, but steady. I am here. Ben felt a pang of sympathy for her. This wasn't some random alien encounter. This was survival. He couldn't even imagine what it must have been like for Varia, stranded far from her home, in a world that she didn't understand. For a moment, he felt an odd, uncomfortable sense of responsibility. So, how did you get here exactly? I mean, that's a long way from wherever you came from, Ben asked, leaning forward in his chair, suddenly eager to know more. Varia seemed to hesitate before answering, and Ben had the distinct feeling that she wasn't entirely ready to share everything. I am a traveler. My kind, we have ships that traverse the stars. We've mapped many planets, ones that can sustain life, ones that cannot. But Earth, your world, it was not on our charts. It was hidden. Hidden? Ben echoed, raising an eyebrow. You mean you just stumbled across us? Like, oops, wrong planet kind of thing? Varia's lips twitched. Not exactly. There are many worlds, many civilizations. Some are known to us. Some are less known. She glanced at him, as if trying to gauge his reaction. Earth was forgotten by many, a planet left alone for reasons unknown. Well, that sounds like a loaded statement, Ben muttered, half to himself. So we're just off the radar for your species? I've got to say, that feels kind of special. He let out a short laugh, though he wasn't entirely sure he was joking. After all, who wouldn't want to be considered mysterious to an alien? Varia's eyes softened at his comment, and for a second, she seemed to consider whether or not to share more. She leaned back slightly, eyes scanning the room as if searching for something. I had heard of your planet, she said at last. We have monitors, devices that scan the universe. They track patterns of energy, signals, things that shouldn't exist. Earth's signals, your signals, became strong over time, but they were different. Ben leaned forward, intrigued. What do you mean different? Different how? Varia hesitated before answering, her voice lower now. The patterns. Your technology, it is evolving differently than others. Your species, humanity, has too much energy, too much raw potential. She paused, her eyes locking with his. And it is dangerous. Ben furrowed his brow. Wait, hold up. Are you saying that we, humans, are a threat to the universe? He gave her a disbelieving look. That doesn't sound like the plot of any sci-fi movie I've ever seen. Usually, aliens are the ones who are the bad guys, not the other way around. Varia tilted her head, as if trying to understand the concept of science fiction humor. Perhaps you do not understand. It is not about intention. It is about capacity. Her voice was filled with quiet intensity. Your people are not yet aware of the dangers you face. The storms of energy are not isolated to one world. They are connected, intertwined with the movements of stars, planets, and galaxies. When you push too hard, when you reach too far, you may awaken things beyond your control. Ben blinked. Wait, you're telling me that the universe might come after us for pushing buttons? That seems a little dramatic. Varia's gaze did not waver. It is not dramatic. It is truth. She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on an earnest tone. Your signals, your technology, it is resonating. And if you continue on your current path, there may be consequences. Ben was silent for a long moment, processing what she had just said. He tried to think of something to ease the growing sense of dread in his stomach. Okay, so we're broadcasting our existence to everyone? That's not exactly what they tell us in science class. I mean, sure, I'm a little paranoid about the government spying on me, but I didn't expect the universe to be involved. Varia's expression softened. You do not know, and yet you already sense something that feels wrong. Ben stared at her, the weight of her words slowly sinking in. Could it be true? His mind raced. He wasn't exactly the type to believe in grand universal conspiracies. He wrote about them, sure, but that didn't mean he bought into it. And yet standing here in front of him, in the midst of a snowstorm, was living proof that things beyond his comprehension were not only real, they were watching. So what should we do? Shut down our tech? Start writing letters to the universe asking for forgiveness? Ben asked, his voice taking on a wry tone. He couldn't help himself. Humor was his defense mechanism. It wasn't that he didn't take Varia seriously. It was just that the whole situation felt surreal. Varia gave him a small, wistful smile, the kind of smile that suggested she almost understood what he was trying to do. You can only learn the truth by seeking it. But be careful, Ben Nichols. Some truths are not easily shared. Ben's smile faded as he considered her words. The storm outside seemed less terrifying now, in comparison to the weight of what she had just said. And as he sat there, in the quiet, with the fire crackling softly in the background, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter, this bizarre, alien intrusion into his life, was just the beginning. The storm outside had not let up. If anything, it had intensified, sending swirls of snow scraping against the cabin windows like the fingers of some unseen, frenzied hand. The wind howled with such ferocity that Ben thought for a moment the entire cabin might be swept up into the air and he'd be soaring off into the snowy heavens alongside his newfound alien guest. But no, the cabin stood firm. The walls creaked, the fire crackled, and in the dim glow of the living room, a bizarre conversation continued between two beings that in some ways could not have been more different. Ben was still trying to wrap his head around the whole alien thing. He'd been expecting something like a spaceship crash or an intergalactic ambassador arriving with a diplomatic envoy. But no, Varia wasn't here to make first contact or deliver some message from the stars. She was running away from a storm, a living, energy-based storm that could tear apart entire worlds. The thought made Ben's brain ache. It was like trying to figure out a puzzle that had too many pieces, all of them mismatched. But he tried to focus, like a good host. Maybe if he could keep his cool, Varia would eventually feel at ease. And if he asked enough stupid questions, maybe she'd forget how completely weird everything had gotten. So, Ben began, attempting to shift the conversation with an awkward chuckle. You said your people live underground? Like, no sunlight or anything? Varia looked at him, her glowing eyes still unsettlingly bright in the dim room. Correct. We do not live under the ground as your people might imagine. It is not dark. We have artificial suns, sources of light that mimic the day cycle of our world. It is sufficient. Ben rubbed his temples. Artificial suns? Man, that's hardcore. And here I am, still trying to figure out how to keep my potted plants alive in the winter. You've got like miniature stars down there. Stars, yes, she nodded, her eyes thoughtful. But they are not miniature. Ben smirked, sensing an opening for some humor. Oh, no need to rub it in. I can barely keep a houseplant alive, and you've got artificial stars in your basement. Varia tilted her head, puzzled. What is a houseplant? Ben nearly choked on his own spit. You don't have houseplants? Like little plants you keep in pots? You know, for decoration and stuff? Varia blinked, her glowing eyes narrowing in concentration. We do not decorate. The ground is sufficient for our needs. The underground is practical. Ben's mind briefly conjured up an image of a massive, plant-free underground society. He decided not to dwell on it too long. Okay, Well, we humans like our plants. They're like little green roommates that don't eat much, but also don't help with the rent. Anyway, he added with a grin, I guess we don't need artificial suns. The one we've got is working just fine, though I've been tempted to throw a party for the sun to keep it interested. You know, give it a reason to stay up. Varia's gaze softened again, the slightest hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It was hard to tell if she truly understood his humor or if she simply appreciated the effort. Either way, the tension in the room lessened, and for the first time since their conversation began, Ben felt like they were on a more even footing. So, Ben pressed on, this whole energy storm thing, how does it work exactly? I mean, you keep saying it's alive. Is it like a giant cloud with a bad attitude, or is there some kind of force at work? Varia took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. It is a force, she began, her voice serious. Not a cloud. It is alive because it grows, changes, feeds. It originates from the core of our planet, its energy. And when it bursts forth, it spreads, consuming everything in its path. It is unlike anything you have on Earth. It is not weather. It is life. She paused, her eyes searching his. It chooses when to strike. Ben stared at her for a long moment, letting the weight of her words settle. There were plenty of things in the universe that didn't make sense. In fact, Ben would argue that most things in the universe didn't make sense. But this was on a different level of strange. And you said you flee from it? He asked. I mean, why not just fight it? You've got all this crazy tech. Surely you've got some kind of anti-storm ray or something, right? Varia's lips parted, as if she was about to respond. Then she seemed to reconsider. Fighting the storm is not possible. We do not have weapons for it. It is not something you can destroy with a ray. Ben stared at her, trying to imagine a storm so powerful that even a spaceship's lasers would be useless against it. Okay, so it's a real storm, he muttered. I mean, we've got storms here on Earth too. Hurricanes, tornadoes, the occasional snowstorm. But we don't exactly have a killer storm that can wipe out an entire planet. Varia nodded gravely. The storm feeds on the planet's energy. It is not a natural occurrence. It is a consequence of our people's actions. We have taken too much from the land, and now the storm is reclaiming. Ben frowned. Reclaiming? What do you mean? Reclaiming, she repeated. The balance. It is a punishment. Ben thought about this for a moment. So, you guys screwed up, and now you've got to live with this living storm as a consequence? Varia looked away. It is not so simple. We did not know what we were doing. We did not know the storm would grow. Yeah, well, Earth isn't exactly perfect either, Ben said, leaning back in his chair and trying to ease the mood with a little levity. We've got our own set of problems. Ever heard of social media? It's like a storm of opinions and no one can get away from it. I'd rather face an actual killer storm than wade through one of those comment threads. Varia's expression softened, though her eyes still carried the weight of her past. I do not understand social media. It sounds unpleasant. Oh, it's a mess, Ben replied with an exaggerated sigh. Imagine a group of people yelling at each other, and somehow no one ever really hears anything. It's mostly cat pictures and hot takes on random subjects. It's exhausting. Varia raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Cat pictures? Ben grinned. Oh yeah, it's this weird thing we've got on Earth. People post pictures of cats being, well, cats. Like sitting in boxes or making funny faces. It's a universal truth that cats will never fail to be weird. It's like they're born to confuse us. Varia blinked, clearly trying to make sense of the concept. You post pictures of cats? She seemed so genuinely perplexed that Ben couldn't help but laugh. I know, it sounds ridiculous, Ben said, but it's very important to some people. You've never seen a cat video? Varia shook her head, looking almost offended on behalf of cats everywhere. I have never encountered a cat, but now I wonder, what makes them so strange? Ben thought for a moment. Well, they do this thing where they stare at you like they know everything about your life, and then they just walk away. It's a mystery. Varia's lips twitched, and for a moment, Ben thought he saw a flicker of amusement. But it was fleeting. Her gaze shifted back to the fire, and she grew quiet again. You find humor in this? She asked, her voice soft. Ben leaned back, looking at her thoughtfully. I guess I do. It's the only way I've found to deal with everything that doesn't make sense in the world. And trust me, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense. He paused, including you, right now. Varia looked at him, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. I am not making sense? Ben laughed again, trying to ease the tension. No, you make sense. It's just that, well, you're not exactly what I expected an alien to be like. You're not flying a spaceship with laser guns or asking me for human specimens. You're just here talking about storms and cats and, well, that's not what the movies taught me. Varia studied him for a moment, her eyes flickering with an unreadable emotion. Then she nodded slowly. Perhaps you are right. This is not what I expected either. She hesitated before adding, but maybe it is what we both need. The snowstorm outside had settled into a heavy silence, the kind that pressed in on all sides, muffling the world beyond the cabin walls. Ben sat on his couch, one leg tucked under him, the other dangling lazily over the side. Varia had retreated into a chair near the fire, her arms crossed and her eyes distant, as though she were contemplating the cosmos, perhaps the fate of her entire species, or maybe just wondering how long she had to endure Ben's hospitality before it was time to get back to whatever intergalactic drama had brought her here. The fire crackled and popped, sending occasional sparks that danced up the chimney like errant stars escaping the gravity of the hearth. Ben didn't mind the silence. He was used to being alone. But the silence between him and Varia felt different. It was a quiet that neither of them quite knew how to navigate, a pause that hung in the air, thick with unspoken words. So, Ben started, breaking the stillness. You said earlier that your people have these ships, the ones that travel the stars. He was trying to keep it light, but curiosity got the better of him. I've got to say, it's a bit wild to think that just a few hours ago, I was sitting here, trying to avoid a snowstorm, and now I'm talking to a traveler from the stars. He gave her a sideways grin. Kind of feels like one of those cheesy movies, huh? Where some guy ends up in a situation he definitely wasn't prepared for. Varia's eyes flicked toward him, her expression unreadable. I have seen many worlds, Ben Nichols, but this one, her voice trailed off. It is different. Ben leaned forward, intrigued. Different how? Varia shifted slightly in her seat, adjusting the glow of her suit as if it were some kind of armor she could wear for protection. Your planet. It has a humility about it, a quietness. Your technology, it is young, your species too. She paused. But that does not mean it is weak. Far from it. Ben chuckled, more out of nervousness than anything. You should have seen the last group project I was part of. Weak would have been an improvement. Varia's expression softened, though her eyes still held that distant, faraway look, as if she were measuring him against some invisible yardstick of cosmic importance. I have seen a great deal, Ben. I have seen civilizations rise and fall. Your species, for all its youth, has the potential to be extraordinary. Ben laughed again, shaking his head. Yeah, well, we've got a funny way of showing it. I mean, look at what we're doing right now. I'm stuck here with you, in a cabin, talking about intergalactic storms, and all we've got to go on are like half-baked conspiracy theories and memes. He raised an eyebrow. I'm starting to think humanity's greatest strength might be our ability to mess up the simplest things. Varia tilted her head, clearly puzzled. Memes? What is that? Ben blinked. Wait, you've never seen a meme? It's It's like a piece of internet culture, a visual joke, I guess. But it's very important. He grinned, feeling a bit ridiculous explaining it to an alien. But who was he kidding? The universe was already ridiculous. Why not add memes into the mix? Varia regarded him, her expression serious. A joke? Through visuals? Yeah, exactly, Ben said. It's like a picture with some words on it that tell you the meaning. The best ones have cats or something cute, though. She nodded slowly, processing the concept. I see. Visual joke. Pretty much, Ben said, leaning back into his seat. You know, when I was growing up, I thought that someday I'd be telling my grandkids about the time I met an alien in a snowstorm. But never in a million years did I think I'd be explaining cat pictures to an extraterrestrial. He smiled, shaking his head. Weird how life works out, huh? Varia's lips twitched. Your life, it seems strange, but perhaps in a good way. Ben glanced at her, a little surprised. A good way? Well, I'm glad you think so, because from where I'm sitting, things are getting pretty out of hand. Varia's smile faded, her face growing more serious. It is true. I do not belong here. But there is something about this place. This earth, that is. She trailed off, as if searching for the right words. Ben leaned forward, sensing the shift in her mood. You don't belong here? But you crashed here. Doesn't that make this place your temporary home? She nodded slightly. I am a traveler, but my mission, it has changed. Her voice dropped a little, like she was letting him in on a secret. I came to Earth to gather knowledge, but now, I am not sure if it is you who should be learning from us, or if we must learn from you. Ben blinked. Us? What, the human race? Yes. She paused, then added softly. Or perhaps it is I who must learn from you. Ben stared at her. I'm sorry. I'm having trouble keeping up. You want to learn from me? He laughed, though it was a little nervous. I'm just a guy trying to avoid a snowstorm with a pot of coffee and a good book. I think I've been one bad decision away from a complete meltdown my entire life. Varia didn't respond right away. Instead, she seemed to study him, as though trying to read the depths of his thoughts. Your people, she began again. You do not seem to realize how powerful you are, how much potential you possess. You believe in fate. But fate, Ben, is only the beginning. Ben blinked again. This was starting to sound like one of those deep philosophical movies where some old guy gives you a life lesson, and everything turns out for the better by the end. Look, Ben said, running a hand through his hair. I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm not exactly the chosen one of Earth. I barely managed to get my laundry done without shrinking something important. I'm not exactly a superhero. Varia's lips curved slightly. You misunderstand. Power does not always come in the form of strength. Sometimes, it is the quiet ones who make the greatest impact. Ben stared at her. So, I'm, what? Some kind of cosmic hidden gem? The universe's best-kept secret? Varia's eyes glimmered, her gaze unwavering. Perhaps you do not see your own value, but others do. And sometimes, the smallest actions can change the course of history. Ben wasn't sure what to make of this. It was the kind of thing that sounded great if you were starring in a sci-fi epic, but in the real world, it seemed a little too cinematic for his taste. He was still reeling from the fact that there was an actual alien sitting in his living room, and now she was telling him that humanity, as a whole, was some kind of cosmic force of nature. He snorted, shaking his head. Look, I'm no hero. I'm just trying to make sure my Wi-Fi works during the snowstorm. But, I mean, if the universe wants to think I'm some kind of hidden talent, I'm not going to argue. Varia tilted her head. Your Wi-Fi? Ben blinked. Never mind. It's just, internet stuff. Look, the point is, I'm no superhero. I'm just a guy stuck in a cabin trying not to freeze. If the universe is looking for a great leader or whatever, they've got the wrong address. Varia's expression softened, almost wistful. Perhaps it is not leadership that is needed. Perhaps it is understanding. Perhaps empathy. Ben blinked again, his mind struggling to catch up. Empathy? You mean like trying to understand people's feelings? She nodded slowly. Yes, your people have much to learn, Ben, but I think you might be the one to help them understand. Ben laughed out loud, the sound echoing strangely in the small cabin. Oh man, this is getting weirder and weirder. I'm just trying to keep it together, and now you're telling me I'm going to save humanity with my empathy? Varia gave him a long look. Perhaps you will. Or perhaps you already have. Before Ben could respond, a soft beeping sound broke through the silence, coming from a small device attached to Varia's wrist. She looked down at it, her expression sharpening. Her hand moved quickly to activate the device, and as she did, a series of strange symbols flickered on the screen. What's going on? Ben asked, feeling a familiar sense of unease creeping back. Varia didn't look up. My people are trying to contact me. I must respond. Ben stood, curiosity bubbling up again. Contact? Who's calling you? Varia's voice was tight. There is no time for explanation. But Ben, the storm, something is happening. The beeping sound from Varia's wrist device stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to hang in the cabin like a thick fog. Ben could feel the weight of it, pressing in on him from all sides. The fire crackled, but even its warmth seemed to shrink in comparison to the cold uncertainty that had settled between them. Varia's eyes were focused on her wrist, but they were distant, unfocused. The soft glow of the device flickered erratically, as though it were struggling to maintain its connection. Ben could almost hear the unspoken tension in the air, the subtle hum of something more significant than the storm outside. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Varia spoke, her voice low and steady, but with an edge of urgency. My people, they are trying to reach me. I must respond. Ben hesitated. But what about the storm? You said it was coming after you. What if it finds us? Varia's face softened, but there was a wariness in her expression. The storm is not an immediate threat to us. Not here, not now. It is my people, my fleet, that is in danger. They are being pulled into the storm's path. Ben's heart skipped a beat. Wait, you said the storm was alive, right? It can move? Varia nodded, her expression grim. Yes, it is not just a weather system. It is a living, intelligent force. And it is hunting. Ben let out a low whistle. You've got to be kidding me. So the storm isn't just some freak of nature. It's like a predator. And you're telling me your fleet is out there? What kind of fleet are we talking about here? Like a couple of little ships? Or do you have an entire armada waiting to be eaten by a giant snowstorm? Varia's eyes glinted, and for a moment, her expression softened, just enough to show the smallest flicker of humor. I do not know if I would call it an armada, but it is a fleet nonetheless. My people are not warriors. We are scientists, explorers, and engineers. We are not prepared for this kind of force. Ben scratched his head. Okay, so I'm stuck in a cabin with an alien who's trying to dodge a space storm, and now her people are in danger? Great. That's just the cherry on top of this weird sundae. He paused for a second, as if trying to make sense of it all. Well, you're not alone. I mean, I'm not sure I can do much, but if there's something I can help with, I've got Wi-Fi. And, a lot of coffee. Varia's gaze softened, and her lips curled into a tiny smile. You are kind to offer your assistance, but this is not a matter of coffee or Wi-Fi. It is a matter of survival. Ben squinted. Yeah, I gathered that part. But how do we survive if you're telling me there's this giant living storm that's picking off entire fleets and... A sudden high-pitched sound cut off his sentence, the unmistakable tone of an incoming transmission. Varia's wrist device beeped again, and she looked down at it quickly, fingers flying over the small console. The screen flashed brightly for a moment before settling into a more stable, though still flickering state. A voice crackled through the device, distorted but still understandable. Varia, Do you copy? This is R'lyn. We're coming in hot. The storm, it's not just a weather pattern anymore. It's alive. It's moving. We're barely holding position, and it's coming for us. Varia's eyes widened as she leaned in, her voice a low murmur. R'lyn, you must listen. The storm it is not a natural event. It is a consequence of our actions. You must leave now, before it... She cut herself off, glancing at Ben as if the thought of the storm's power could not be fully articulated in words. The voice on the other end crackled again, sharp with fear. We can't leave, it's locked onto us. We tried to outmaneuver it, but... Another voice cut in, urgent and strained. R'lyn, this is Naz. The fleet is... breaking apart. We cannot hold this position much longer if we don't get help. Ben blinked rapidly. Hold up, you're telling me that your fleet, the same one you've been avoiding, has already encountered this storm, and now they need help? Varia's expression was colder now, her face set in a determined mask. Yes, they do. They will not survive without assistance. Ben sat back, trying to make sense of it all. Okay, well, what exactly can I do to help? I'm guessing I don't have a fleet of my own, and the only ship I've got is my old Subaru, which... He gestured vaguely toward the small wooden cabin door. Isn't exactly space-worthy. Varia's lips curved again, a hint of amusement breaking through the tension. I do not believe your vehicle will be of much use, Ben, but you do have something more important. You have resourcefulness. Ben chuckled, mostly out of disbelief. Resourcefulness? Me? The guy who can barely keep a houseplant alive? Varia's eyes softened again, but this time there was an undercurrent of something more, something that suggested she believed in him. Yes, you. All of us are capable of more than we think, even in situations that seem impossible. Ben let out a long sigh, the weight of her words sinking in. He wanted to tell her it wasn't that simple. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't some genius who could solve intergalactic crises. But the fact remained that this wasn't some regular storm. This was a cosmic entity capable of destroying entire civilizations. He looked at Varia, meeting her gaze. All right, so what's the plan? Because right now, it seems like the only plan is waiting for the storm to find us. For the first time, Varia seemed to hesitate. The plan is to buy time. Time for my people to escape. Ben raised an eyebrow. By time? You're telling me we're bait? She nodded slowly, but her expression didn't change. If the storm finds us, we will use its energy to our advantage. My fleet will know where we are. They will follow our signals. They are... coming. Ben shook his head, trying to wrap his mind around the absurdity of the situation. This is getting crazier by the second. I'm literally waiting for the part where I wake up and find out this was all a dream. Varia gave him a long, searching look. It is not a dream. It is reality, and reality is often more strange than our dreams. Ben opened his mouth to reply, but stopped himself. Maybe she was right. Maybe the universe was too strange for any of them to truly understand. What was he supposed to say? So what now? We sit here and hope for the best? No. Varia's voice was firm, though there was still a gentleness in her tone. Now, we fight, but we do not fight with weapons or power. We fight with our minds, our ability to adapt, to outwit. Ben leaned back, trying to think. Outwit a storm that's alive and probably has its own mental capabilities? Varia nodded. Yes. If we can divert its energy, if we can create enough of a distraction, we might just be able to outmaneuver it. Ben stared at her. Well, that's a relief, he muttered, because that's exactly what I'm good at, creating distractions. Varia's gaze softened again, the tiniest flicker of understanding in her eyes. Then we shall see how resourceful you truly are, Ben Nichols. Ben leaned forward, the weight of the situation pressing on him. But there was an odd sense of excitement growing within him, too. Maybe he wasn't some hero, but maybe, just maybe, he could help Varia. He could help them all, and if nothing else, He could keep cracking jokes until the whole thing blew up in his face. After all, what did he have to lose? "Well," Ben said, running a hand through his hair, "I'm no expert in storm fighting, but I've seen a few action movies. Maybe I can figure this out." Varia looked at him with a small, knowing smile. "We shall see." The storm outside roared louder, a steady growl in the distance, and for the first time since their strange encounter began, Ben felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they weren't entirely alone in this fight. The storm was quieter now. It was as if the universe had taken a breath, paused for a moment of reflection, and then decided that perhaps it had been too dramatic. The winds that had roared like a living thing, tearing through the mountainside, had calmed into a soft, eerie whisper. The swirling clouds, which had once seemed so threatening and insurmountable, now parted to reveal the sky, a deep, star-filled canvas that stretched as far as Ben could see. He stood at the edge of the cabin's porch, looking out over the snow-covered landscape. The cold nipped at his cheeks, but it wasn't the same biting cold it had been before. Now it felt almost comforting, like the aftermath of something wild and uncontrollable, a kind of stillness that let you breathe again, free of the weight of the storm's fury. Varia stood beside him, her eyes on the horizon. Her face was calm, but there was a look in her eyes that Ben hadn't seen before, a mixture of exhaustion and relief. They had made it through, but it wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. "You did it," she said, her voice soft, as if she were still processing the events that had just unfolded. Ben turned to her, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "Well, I didn't exactly do much. I mostly just kept making bad jokes and hoping the universe wouldn't notice." Varia gave him a wry smile, but her eyes glimmered with a depth of emotion that Ben wasn't sure he'd ever be able to fully understand. "You helped, more than you realize. Your humanity, your ability to think differently, to adapt, to approach problems in unexpected ways, it is something that my people could never have predicted. You have more power in you than you think." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Okay, now you're really starting to sound like one of those motivational speakers from the 90s. Do I get a plaque for surviving this?" Varia chuckled, the sound strange and musical in a way that made Ben feel both grounded and somehow like he was standing on the edge of something far bigger than himself. "Perhaps you do deserve a plaque, but I fear my people do not deal in such earthly awards. You will have to settle for the knowledge that you have done something extraordinary." Ben laughed softly. "Yeah, well, I'm still not sure how this all happened. One minute I'm dodging a snowstorm, the next thing I know I'm an intergalactic hero. I've got no idea what just happened." Varia turned to face him fully, her expression serious again. "You may not understand it, but what happened was real. You found a way to use what you had, your mind, your creativity, your connection to this planet, and you outsmarted an intelligence far greater than your own. That is something no one can take away from you." Ben rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of everything. The storm, the alien fleet, the strange living force that had nearly destroyed everything. His head was spinning. He never could have predicted any of this when he woke up that morning. Hell, he hadn't even expected a snowstorm. And now? Now he was supposed to understand how he had managed to, in some weird way, save the galaxy? He shook his head. "I mean, I'm just trying to figure out how to get the Wi-Fi back up. And you're telling me I've got cosmic importance?" Varia didn't laugh this time, though the corner of her mouth twitched. "In time you will understand. There is always more to learn, more to do. You have perhaps begun something far greater than either of us imagined." Ben exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. The journey he'd been on had been strange, to say the least. But even in the chaos, there had been moments of clarity. He had faced something impossible, something far beyond anything he could have comprehended, and somehow he'd made it through. Not alone, of course. Varia had been there, guiding him in ways that still left him awestruck. But still, he felt different. It was like something inside him had shifted, had expanded in a way that made him realize just how small his previous concerns had been. How insignificant the little things, like his failed attempts at adulting really were. "So what happens now?" Ben asked, looking out into the open snowfield, the remnants of the storm now vanishing behind them, like the tail end of a bad dream. Varia stepped forward, her boots crunching on the frozen earth. "Now I must return to my people. They will need time to regroup, to rebuild. But we will not forget you, Ben Nichols. Your actions, your courage, have ensured that many will live to see another day." Ben felt a knot form in his stomach. The idea of her leaving, of returning to her far-off world, to the cosmic forces and the galaxy-spanning dramas that Ben could hardly begin to understand, was strangely unsettling. She was different. Not just in the obvious alien ways, but in something deeper. She had shown him that there was more to this universe than the daily grind of a mountain cabin and a world that often felt far too small. "Do you have to go?" Ben asked, his voice a little quieter than he meant it to be. Varia met his gaze. There was something in her eyes that made his heart skip a beat. "I must. But you see, it is not the end. It is the beginning." Ben looked at her, feeling a strange sense of loss. "What do you mean, the beginning?" "There is much for you to learn," she said, her voice almost wistful. "And you have a role to play. It may not seem clear now, but one day, you will understand what this moment truly means. Your journey has just begun, Ben Nichols." Ben felt a shiver run down his spine. He wanted to ask more, to dig deeper into what she meant, but he didn't. Instead, he just nodded. It was enough for now. It had to be. "I guess I'll just keep being a superhero in my own way then," he said with a grin, trying to break the tension. Varia smiled softly, the humor in her eyes returning. "Perhaps, but remember, true heroes do not seek recognition. They simply act." "Right," Ben said with a mock salute. "No need for the plaque then. I'll just go back to my mountain cabin and wait for the next big storm to hit." Varia's smile lingered a moment longer. Then, without another word, she turned toward the edge of the snow where a glowing ship, a sleek, otherworldly craft, had begun to shimmer into view, its form coalescing from the distortion of the atmosphere. As she stepped toward it, Ben felt a pang in his chest. He wasn't sure why, but the idea of her leaving left him with a sense of finality, of loss. And yet, there was something liberating about it too, an acknowledgement that this chapter, this strange, impossible chapter, had come to a close. Before she entered the ship, Varia looked back at him, her gaze intense. "Thank you, Ben. For everything." Ben waved, his smile more genuine than it had been in a long time. "I guess, don't be a stranger, okay?" The craft's doors closed, and the ship began to lift off, slowly at first, then picking up speed as it shot into the sky. Ben watched it disappear into the vastness above, a distant point of light, and for a moment, the world felt impossibly small. But then, as the stars flickered in the sky above him, Ben realized that maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. The universe was vast, yes, but it was also filled with people and aliens who could change it, one strange encounter at a time. He turned back toward the cabin. He'd lived through an impossible adventure. He'd made it out alive. And though he might never fully understand what had happened, one thing was for certain: his life had changed forever. As he stepped inside and closed the door behind him, Ben chuckled to himself. "Well," he said to no one in particular, "I guess it's back to Wi-Fi and snowstorms. But hey, who knows? Maybe the next time something weird happens, I'll actually be ready for it."